Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to help you complete the 6 little tasks here, which is where you need to describe what each of these are. But in order to do that, you have to first of all understand what a hydrograph actually is. And that is what you're looking up here in this particular type of graph. Now, a hydrograph is a graph that shows you what a river does when it rains. Okay? Now let's deal with the 2 main parts of this graph. The first part is shown here, which is the actual rain event. Okay? Now let's just deal with the rain event itself. What is the rain event? Well, the rain event is the period of time that it rains on the drainage basin. And if you remember from the previous lessons, a drainage basin is the area of land that surrounds a river where the water lands and drains into that river. So let's just say it's raining on our landscape, and here we can see very specifically that our rain event has occurred for about 4 hours. Okay, and we can see that because we've got the first hour, the second hour, the third hour, and there's the 4th hour. So here is a rain event of 4 hours. The rain event wasn't consistent. Also, it had a peak period of time, which is called the peak rainfall. Okay, and that happened, by the look of it, in the 3rd hour. Okay, so our rain event is the rainfall that lands on a drainage basin. It is measured by how many hours it lasts for. And during that period of time, one of those hours will have the time when the most rain came out of the sky, which is known as the peak rainfall. Okay, so that is you able now to describe the rain event. The discharge of the river. Now that is the actual amount of water flowing past a certain point where you're measuring the river itself. And on these hydrographs, the discharge of the river is shown by the line. Let me just change the colour there. I'm just highlighting there, which changes after the rain event. So we have to expect that when it rains, the discharge is going to start to increase, and we can see that happening there. It'll reach a peak and then it'll fall again. Okay, so the discharge of the river is the amount of water passing a given point every second, and it's actually measured in cumecs. Okay, the peak discharge. Now, on our line graph, the peak discharge is shown by the time at which the highest volume of water was passing the point that we're measuring in our river. Okay, so the peak discharge is the highest discharge the river gets to. It will have a certain time when that happened. So in this case, it looks like it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and it will have a peak volume, in this case about 50 cumecs. That would be the peak discharge. Okay. Right, the lag time. Now the lag time is the difference between the peak discharge and the peak rainfall. Okay, so it's the time it takes from when the most rain came out of the sky, which is here, which looks around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 p.m. And the time when the river got to its highest, which is the peak discharge, is 1 a.m. So the lag time on this graph, if we do a quick little sum, it's 8 hours till midnight plus 1 hour for the morning, so we are looking at 9 hours. So the lag time is the time it takes from the peak rainfall to the peak discharge, and in this case it's 9 hours. Last 2 parts of this graph is the rising limb. So the rising limb is the time when the river was rising, when the discharge of the river was rising. So on our graph, the rising limb is this part here. Okay. Another thing you want to write about the rising limb down here is that we are interested in how steep the rising limb is. Is it a steep gradient like this one shown here, or is it quite a gentle gradient? If it was like that, that would be a more gentle gradient. Why that's important is that tells us how fast the river is rising. Okay. Now you've probably guessed that the last part of our graph is the recession limb. That's just a fancy word for the part of the graph where the river's going down. So it's this bit. So the recession limb is the part of the discharge when the discharge of the river is falling. Okay, we're also interested in how quick that fall happens. So it has a gradient too. Now you'll notice in this, the gradient of the falling limb is less steep than the rising limb. So if we look at the rising limb, we can see that it was quite steep up, but then the actual recession limb is not so steep. So it's not just that it's the falling limb, but is it as steep as the rising limb? What in this graph it shows is that a river goes down slower than it went up. Okay, so those are the 6 key things. You want to use what I've said to help write a sentence about what you understand each of these 6 points to mean.